Okay, here's my audience. Four steps. That's all it takes for someone to legally own a gun. According to Brian Abel, there are 4 different steps in order for one person to legally own a gun. Step 1 is that you must present a valid driver's license. Step 2 is that you have to fill out the ATF form. Step 3, a background check is done. And lastly, step 4, 3 outcomes can arise. Outcome 1 is proceeding. That means that person can take the gun home that day. Outcome 2 is delayed. Something has popped up, such as a common last name, so more researching must be done. And outcome 3 is denied. That means that person is prohibited from buying a gun. Just think, when that one person passes all the requirements, boom, there's one more legal weapon in their possession. The United States needs to enforce tighter ways for American citizens to contain ownership by tightening the Brady Law, making it illegal for some to own a gun, and knowing how to properly store a gun so there's less theft and accidents in the world. The Brady Law was signed into law in 1993 and was put into place for criminal background checks at federal licensed dealers to be done to prevent dangerous people from purchasing a gun. The FBI also checks the person wanting to buy a gun and will then decide if that person is eligible to own a gun. An unknown author states that the people prohibited from owning guns are fugitives, felons, domestic abusers, and the dangerously mentally ill. Unfortunately, there are loopholes for those ineligible to legally own a gun to get their hands on one. For instance, there are always private sellers that are illegally selling guns, states the New York Times. Even though they are selling the guns, most private sellers don't even do a background check. They just take the money and don't question anything. This is the danger that Americans are dealing with. The Washington Post also states that it is hard to know exactly how many guns are in the United States, but as of 2009, there are over 310 million guns owned in the United States. And by now, it is safe to say that that number has risen. Because we see so many guns owned in the United States, it is hard knowing whose gun is legally owned. That is why Americans need to push to make every single gun purchase in this country have a background check that says yes, that person is able to own a gun, or no, that person cannot buy a gun. Moving into my next point, the people prohibited from owning a gun should not have one. It is obvious that the people, like felons, fugitives, domestic abusers, and the dangerously mentally ill, have something wrong with them, and the U.S. is just trying to make America safe by not allowing them to own a gun. The Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence explains that background checks have prevented over 2 million people in these categories to obtain a gun. It is settling knowing that the background checks for these individuals are working, so they are preventing those who don't deserve a gun and not letting them through with it. The Americans are also very supportive when it comes to dangerous people in this world to not be able to own a gun. In 2013, a poll was taken by the New England Journal of Medicine on how Americans felt about certain individuals owning a gun. The Americans were supporting a 10-year prohibition on gun possession. The results showed that if one person was convicted of any serious crime as a juvenile, Americans showed 83.1% support to a 10-year hold. The background checks seem to be working, so it is important for the gun salesman to keep pushing them and not granting gun ownership if the person is a fugitive, felon, domestic abuser, or seriously mentally ill. My third point is keeping guns on the low. I don't mean keeping them hidden from the government, but I do mean keeping them hidden from others. It is extremely important to keep guns locked in a safe when they are not being used. Josh Donahue claims that hundreds of thousands of guns each year are stolen. This statistic is horrifying because those guns stolen were more than likely legally bought and are now in the hands of a potential threat. It is not only important to keep guns out of the hands of criminals, but as children as well. Fox News claims that in 2015, there were 141 accidental deaths that took the lives of a minor. Advocates for stricter gun laws are arguing that if guns are safely stored, there would not be the significant number in accidental minor deaths each year. Deaths from guns are preventable and can be avoided if people know how to properly store them. Because then people who aren't supposed to have the gun, including children, won't know where to look or how to get in. My last point is how these plans will work. The Brady Law is working, and it is good to know that a background check is done with all legal gun purchases. The downside to this is that people are still finding loopholes and getting their hands on a gun. This can maybe be avoided by following up with the gun owners to see how they are enjoying their gun. Another plan that needs to be enforced is how gun ownership is prevented by not giving it to the people I stated earlier. If those individuals have failed a background check or have no reason to own a gun because they are prohibited, there is no reason they should have their hands on a gun. Lastly, keeping guns locked up in a safe is one plan of action that Americans can easily do. If a gun is properly stored, then no one can get it unless they are intended to. It is sad knowing that thousands and thousands of guns each year are stolen. In fact, it is scary. This is why it is so important for gun owners to store their guns so children and also adults can't get into them without permission. In conclusion, most Americans deserve to own a gun. It's in the Constitution under the Second Amendment that we have the right to bear arms. There just needs to be tighter restrictions so school shootings and mass shootings don't happen anymore, so not all Americans can own a gun, and so we can feel safe during our daily activities and outings. The United States needs to enforce tighter ways for American citizens to contain ownership by tightening the Brady Law, making it illegal for some to own a gun, and properly storing a gun so there's less theft and accidents. And here is my audience one more time.